Okay. Please state your name, your major, your year, and where you're from.
My name is OK Schlatter. I am majoring in telecommunications. This is my second year at Ball State, and I am from a small town in northern Indiana called Wakarusa.
Okay. How did you end up in this class?
Honestly, it was just because this section fit my schedule the best.
Okay. Were you interested in the topic before you took the class?
I didn't really know what the different topics for the different Honors 199 sections were going to be when I signed up. But as soon as I found out what the section was, which was later in the summer, like a couple weeks before classes started, once I actually pre-ordered my books, I was looking forward to it because I was expecting a lot of discussions a lot of in-depth discussions, especially with all of the unrest that we had at the beginning of the summer.
Okay. What was your small hometown that you mentioned and neighborhood like?
So population is between 1,500 to 2,000 people. I actually had to go to the next town over for high school, so it was a very small town. As far as like ethnicity and race goes, it's like 90% white, if not more. It's very white. And I remember one of my best friends in high school, his parents were immigrants from Vietnam. And he said that many times he would forget that he was Vietnamese. He'd forget that he wasn't white, which was good in a sense that he didn't feel like he received any like he wasn't like targeted because of his race, which is good. But like then also he forgot his own racial heritage, which is also kind of bad.
Yeah, absolutely. While you were growing up, did you think about race much?
Not really. Yeah, no, it just wasn't something that I thought about much.
When people around you talked about race, what were those conversations like?
See, most of the conversations that I would have heard were probably from parents, or well, not so much my parents, but excuse me, my grandparents perhaps. And a lot of the times it was saying things like just repeating conservative talking points about how it's because of their cultures and not because of their skin color that they were seeing all these disadvantages.
Okay.
And experiencing what is racism. They weren't blaming it on racism, they were blaming it on cultural differences.
Okay. When did you first start thinking about race, or do you see yourself as someone with a race socially?
When did I start thinking about race? Do I see myself as someone with race? It was probably around 2017, like after Trump was elected and then inaugurated, that I started thinking more about race and just looking into what Black Lives Matter actually means and the things that they're actually arguing about and the reasons that they actually experience those things. But I didn't start thinking of myself as being racist probably until about a year ago. Because like just on the internet, there would be, or like on Twitter or on Reddit, I would start seeing posts that would start pointing out things about white people and like just labeling white people as a racial group, which was something that I hadn't really experienced until around then. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess. And then all that wasn't really obvious until this class, which made it much more eye-opening. Like, yeah, whiteness is a race. It isn't the norm. And like, it opened my eyes to a bunch of assumptions that I had made. Like, my experience is the average experience. It's the normal experience. It's an unraced experience, which isn't true because I am white, I am male, and those things affect my experience. And my parents they're not wealthy enough to be affected by Biden's tax plan, but we are still wealthier than a lot of the people in the hometown that I grew up in. And so back in the spring and early summer, I started to look at that and all the ways that had also given me a lot of privileges that many people don't get because just because they're not white or because they're not male or because they don't make enough money, sometimes because they're not white or because they're not male. So just trying to think about those and keep an open mind so that or just trying to recognize the way that has affected previous events in my life, and then just trying to keep an open mind going forward so that I can recognize when I get something because of my privileges.
Okay. Have you experienced or witnessed any racism in your life, either towards you or towards people that you knew?
Excuse me. Again, I just ate before we started, so.
That's all right. It is dinner time.
I can't recall any firsthand accounts, but my brother's girlfriend isn't white. And one of the first things that my parents asked her when she visited our house for the first time was, oh, where are your parents from? And they didn't mean to be rude. They didn't mean to be racist by it, but it still hurt her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that, like, some people, they don't think about that it could hurt someone and, turns into a microaggression. So
yeah,
absolutely. How do your other identities or social positions, aka gender, class, region, religion, etc., shape your experience in tandem with race?
See, my one identity that doesn't put me in the majority super privileged position would be the fact that I'm gay, I'm not straight, and I've had to deal with a lot of like internalized homophobia, which is completely different from internalized racism. And like those are two very, very different things. But what they do have in common is just like an internalized hate for yourself that you don't recognize as hate for yourself. So that's been just a really interesting thing that I've been dealing with at the same time as we've been having this class. And as far as the way that those other things shape my experience, like the fact that I'm male, the fact that I'm white, the fact that I grew up in a Protestant Christian household, the fact that my parents are relatively wealthy in the middle class. I think I've already mentioned that I've received a lot of privilege from that. And then, you know, some of my grandparents, or like my dad's parents, are even wealthier than us, and so they've privileged us a lot through that. But there were just a lot of things that we didn't have to worry about. Like throughout the 2008 crisis, we didn't have to ever worry about buying new clothes or having enough food or losing our house or anything like that. And we had to tighten a couple budgets, but we lived through that relatively comfortably.
Okay. Let's see. One of the themes of the class has been that race structures our global society. It's not just something over here or over there, or something that only affects racialized groups of people. We're all living in the system, and we all have the capability to imagine and to help create something different, a more equal society. Where does your hometown fit in the system, and where do you feel that you fit in that system?
So my hometown, like I mentioned earlier, is pretty small. But we are pretty close to Elkhart and Goshen, and those areas have a very large Latinx population, a lot of immigrants from Latin America, and so there's, like, in the last decade or so, there's been a large increase of that population, I mean, across the whole country, but that we've also seen that in our hometown. I remember in first grade, we had a new student whose first language was Spanish. So even in the small towns like mine, yeah, there is still a role, because people that work in like the larger cities will still live in those smaller towns and still go to the schools in those smaller towns. But right now, like, there's one neighborhood in particular that has gone up where most of those people live. And I remember once my parents, or my dad at least, expressed concern about the idea of potentially moving into a house in that neighborhood because, well, that's where all those other people were moving into. But at the same time, like, that was also like the only place in our town where there was new construction happening. So I don't know what my hometown could do in particular. I feel like they just need to grow and need to live with these people, and just like, so that they can observe their experiences and just like get to know them. I think that would do a lot, and I think that would bring our town forward a lot. Because in a way, my town is kind of segregated like that, because we've got this one neighborhood. It's a new neighborhood. It's a mostly non-white neighborhood, and then pretty much all the other neighborhoods are mostly white. And so in that way, it's kind of segregated. So as the town grows, I think they need to make sure that they aren't keeping it segregated like that, that they're allowing more integration like that. Because I don't think there's anything legally stopping integration. I don't think there's anyone maliciously trying to keep races separate. I think that's just an unfortunate side effect of the way things have happened. Of course, I could be wrong. There could be people in our local government here that are maliciously trying to keep non-white people separate from white people. That would suck. That would be awful. I would hate that. But if they were exposed, I don't think they would get voted out. I would certainly vote against them. I would certainly try to vote them out. But part of the problem might be that no one would run against them. And so the most you could do would be not vote for them and just abstain from that election, which sucks because like they're still going to get in if they're running unopposed. And so then I guess the non-racist thing to do in that situation would be to abstain from that vote. And then the anti-racist thing to do would be to run against them, oppose them, make people aware that they shouldn't be in this office. I don't think that's something I am qualified to do. My town is very conservative, if you couldn't tell, and I happen to be not very conservative. So I don't think the chances of me actually winning would be high. So in that case, if anything, it would probably end up being more symbolic.
Okay. Ready to move on to the next part?
Sure.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about our campus and our world. So how have the events of 2020, like the pandemic, the uprisings and activism, the election, or other current events, shaped your perception of racism and anti-racism in the United States?
Yeah, I can't believe we're at the end of 2020 now, but yeah, like pretty much like the last year or so is when all that's happened. But in that year, I've gotten a much greater understanding of like the difference between not racist and anti-racist. Like that's when a bunch of things started to click for me. I think it's when a bunch of things started to click for a whole bunch of other white people, because we started seeing white people involved in the Black Lives Matter protests and demonstrations. I started it's like, sure, the current policy might be not racist, but because of all the disadvantages that have been put upon non-white people from racist policies of the past, they're now so far behind, so far disadvantaged that they don't have the same equal opportunities, even if legally they should. And so it's become a lot clearer to me and a lot clearer to a whole lot of other people that we need policies that will level the playing field, make sure that these people are lifted up so that they can have the same opportunities.
Okay. How have you been involved, if at all, in let me try that again. How have you been involved, if at all, in any anti-racist actions or activities this year?
I wish I was involved in the protests and the demonstrations, but the truth is, I don't think I have been very involved. And it saddens me that I haven't been involved. Looking back, it's a regret that I have. I wish I was more involved. I don't know. The summer was just kind of rough for me. I don't know. Finishing up school online and then not having a job, and then I had a whole bunch of other mental health issues throughout the summer. Like, I wish, and like, in a way, those are all excuses, but I wish I was more involved.
Okay.
I wish I had been more involved.
Well, on the pandemic too, I mean, that was a huge concern that a lot of people had about going out and demonstrating. So it's understandable with all the circumstances that you went through on top of the pandemic.
And then all it took for me to get the coronavirus was coming home over Thanksgiving break and not even going anywhere, just coming home because my dad got it and then he came and picked me up and brought me home.
Oh no.
And then we didn't know until you started showing symptoms the next day.
Oh, that's rough. Well, are you feeling better?
I'm feeling much better now.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good. Good to hear. So how would you describe race relations and or race issues at Ball State, or have you seen any of it? Or
I would say at this moment, things are a little bit more tense than they've been before, just because of the Trump rallies that occurred on or near campus like a couple weeks ago, where there was a lot of racial hate poured out onto the students and the student community on a couple nights following Donald Trump's historic loss. Hallelujah.
yes.
So that was probably the most obvious moment of how bad things could be when people who have racist thoughts and opinions feel liberated enough to express them and act on them in public. And that was, as a student, I don't have a roommate and I can be a little bit of a hermit, so I spend most of my time in my dorm room. So I didn't hear about it until after it happens. But from the things that I have heard, I'm really disappointed in the Muncie community.
Yeah, it was definitely disappointing and heartbreaking to see that going on. Okay, so Ball State is a diverse place, yet it is historically and predominantly a white institution. How have you navigated that diversity and the whiteness at Ball State since you have arrived?
Yeah. Last semester, last spring, was the first time I had ever had a teacher that wasn't white. I had this wonderful Black woman as one of my professors teaching a media criticism class. And part of the content of that class is talking about racial stereotypes in film. And that was probably the most uncomfortable I had ever seen in a class. Like, it was uncomfortable for me, and it was uncomfortable for everyone else. And like, yeah, the class was mostly white, but I don't know. I did well enough and participated enough in that class that I think I was one of that teacher's or that professor's favorite students, at least in that class. I got a perfect grade on the final, and I have no idea how that happened, but it did. So I would like to think that means that, I don't know. It, of course, like, we also talked about like how those stereotypes evolved throughout history and how government propaganda played a huge part in forming some of those stereotypes, like how Chinese people were treated horribly and had terrible stereotypes against them, and then the government created propaganda of the like model immigrant or model minority, and then even though that's like a positive stereotype, it still had a whole bunch of detrimental effects on all Asian people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that class was probably the trickiest time that I've ever had to navigate talking about race and whiteness. Yeah. So I don't know how well it went. I would like to think that all of the students in that class left better and more aware of race and racial relationships and diversity and navigating all that. Who knows? I'm sure a ton of students were just like, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to try to forget that this ever happened.
Yeah, you hear about that quite a bit, that people, especially with, that's one of the biggest differences between being not racist and anti-racist is it's very easy to just kind of shove it under the rug and not think about it. But it takes effort to be anti-racist, and it's more important than just shoving it under the rug. So for sure. Last question about our campus. Do you think that Ball State does a good job creating a culture of belonging? If so, why? And if not, why?
I feel like no matter which university, which institution I went to, if it was a public state-funded institution that wasn't like a private Christian school where I would be discriminated because of my sexuality, I would feel like I'd belong because I am white and I'm male, and it's easy to cater to white men. So I feel like that's a question that I have not looked into enough. I have not listened to enough other experiences to have a well-rounded opinion on that issue.
Okay. All right. So these questions are focused mostly on our class. What has this course meant for you?
What has this course meant for me personally? This course, it's been rough, but like I've really appreciated this course. And in some ways, it feels almost morbid to say that I enjoy talking about racism and race relations, but I enjoy talking about the discussions on the best ways to overcome those issues, and the discussions about the readings that we've had discussions about other people's and experiences, learning about the experiences of people who aren't always men and who aren't necessarily white. I feel like it has been a very I don't know if helpful is the word I'm looking for. It's I can't think of the right word or a word that satisfies how I feel about it, because I guess in a way it's been sort of an eye-opening class in a way.
Okay.
It's been a really good learning experience.
Good. Okay. What have you learned this semester, and what will you take with you?
You know, I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot of the readings and discussions we've had have been like, oh, so this thing that happens was because of racism, or oh, those are the words that I can put to feelings that I've had. And okay, so that's what anti-racism means. Okay. And that's the difference between being not racist and anti-racist. It's like inherently, like, I knew that there was a difference, but like just defining that difference just was really important, I feel like. Because like there were a lot of concepts that I kind of understood, and a lot of nuances that I kind of had a vague idea about. But then I feel like this class just defined those ideas and those thoughts.
Okay.
Gave me references for when I'm talking to people who doubt the existence of systemic racism.
Yeah, absolutely. What have you learned that has changed your perspective the most?
What did I learn that has changed my perspective the most? I don't necessarily know if there was anything that changed my perspective. If anything, it just fertilized some seeds that had been planted previously, and just like grew and pushed my perspective, matured my perspective in a way. Because I understand why, like I have a better understanding of how race fits into like my social, political, and economic ideologies, and the understandings of how capitalism has oppressed Black people because of race has kind of just strengthened my more left-leaning philosophies and my more socialist philosophies, I guess. Like there's a reason a lot of like civil rights leaders and Black Lives Matter leaders do tend to promote a lot of policies that could be described as socialist.
Okay. What do you think it means to be an anti-racist?
To be an anti-racist is to be more than just not racist. To be anti-racist is to fight against racism, to try to undo all of the years of disadvantages that racist policy has created, and that non-racist policy perpetuates.
Okay. Where do you see Ball State, Muncie, Indiana, or the U.S. 5-10 years from now?
5 years from now, I see the U.S. having a much stronger affirmative action program. 10 years from now, potentially having a universal basic income. And hopefully free public healthcare and college education. Ball State, 5-10 years from now, I see doing a lot to increase diversity and to do everything they can to increase the graduation rate of non-white students so that it at least matches the graduation rate of white students. Unfortunately, I don't see Indiana as a state trying to push for any of those things terribly hard. And also, and whatever Ball State does, like that's going to affect the rest of Muncie. Like Ball State pretty much funds Muncie anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Do you think you'll remember any of this stuff?
I think I will remember the number of late nights I had the week following the election. I think I'll remember the number of protests that happened this summer. And I hope 10 years from now, I will be looking back at protests that I participated in.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Is there anything else that you would like to say or add to this conversation that wasn't asked?
No, I don't think so. I think if I tried to say anything more, or I can't think of anything else, and I think if I could think of anything else, I'm not sure I'd want to share it because this interview is already waxing rather long.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for doing this interview with me.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of the class with me.
Yeah, so thank you.